So, how we can improve our review process even further? Let's check this one out. If we are following the Git flow way of working, it basically means that in our main branch we should always have the latest version of the application which was deployed to production. What it actually means? It means that in our main branch we will always have the latest schema version of our production database. It basically means that now if I want to do the pull request, if I want to review the pull request of, let's say, one of my feature branches back to my dev or main branch, whatever, I can say that in my main branch or in my dev branch, I have my baseline. So I can compare that baseline to those changes which I am about to include in my pull request, even if it was like more than one migration, and I can review that all together. So how I can actually do that with Azure DevOps? Let's check this one out. So first of all, here in my pipeline, I'm defining a resource. I'm defining basically a repo resource, and I'm pointing it to the same repo as I'm using for this particular pipeline as well. So now I will be able to check out the same repo in two different folders. Why I need to do that? Because I can do that for two different branches. I can check out, let's say, one branch as a current branch, and I can check out the second branch as a baseline branch. And this is what I'm doing here. As you can see, my steps are the following. The first one is checkout self, which will basically check out the current version in a current branch. And the next checkout is check out the baseline. And the baseline, as you can see, the repo name is the baseline, and this is referring to that baseline that I defined here. Okay, and then I'm basically doing more or less the same stuff that I showed you before in the previous pipeline. So I'm installing .NET 5, I'm restoring the packages, I'm doing all that stuff, and then I'm also installing the Entity Framework tool, and I'm generating my scripts. I'm generating my script for the baseline, and I'm generating my script for the new. So on that part, I could probably stop, but I do believe that you see actually here on the right side that there is more or less half of the pipeline also down there. So why I'm not happy with this only solution in particular? The reason is that, of course, if you're working with the relatively small migrations, then your script became relatively small, and what you can do then, you can just download those two scripts, and then you can review them on your local machine using basically any tool you want that can help you to compare two files. But if you're working in enterprise, if you're working in a relatively big project, then at some point it may become extremely challenging. Okay, so is there a way for me how I can, let's say, compare those two files somewhere there on server? Of course I can do that, and the way how I did that in this particular demo is that I was actually using the Git itself. I was using the regular Git because the Git is already there as a source control management tool, because otherwise I will be unable to check out my repos in the first place. So let's see how I did that. I did that with this a bit crazy command line activity, which started at line 80 and ended up at line 104. Okay, so there are a few things to highlight here. So first of all, because I wanted to make it pretty, I was forced to run the line number 84, and 84 basically creates an empty folder called diff in my staging directory for my artifacts. And I did that because otherwise Git would be unable to compare those two files and save the results of that comparison to the folder which is not created yet. Okay, so I run, as you can see here at line 86, git diff, and then I provided a bunch of arguments. First of all, I provided no index, which actually means that I'm comparing those two scripts, and those two scripts, they are, let's say, not under the source control. And you may ask me actually why they are not under source control, and the reason is that those scripts were just generated a few moments ago as a part of my activity using the Entity Framework CLI tool. So the C# files themselves, they are under the source control, of course, but the SQL scripts I produce, they are not. So that is why I've added the no index argument. Okay, so then I've basically added a bunch of other arguments like ignore all spaces, space change, and la la la. The next one argument which is important is on line 94. Here I'm basically specifying that I want to save the results of that comparison to that schema.diff file. And line 95 and line 96, I'm basically stating the two different files that I want to compare, and of course I will compare my baseline to my new version of the schema. And then there is one more nasty thing about how the Git CLI works in general. I cannot explain that, but at least I can highlight that as a fact, because when I was implementing that for the first time, I was basically spending a lot of efforts to make it work in the first place. So the issue is that when you will run the git diff command, especially in this mode, it will generate three kinds, let's say, of exit codes. It can generate exit code 0, which will mean that there were no differences between those two files. It can generate the exit code 1, which will mean that there were some differences. Or it can generate the exit code 2, which will mean that there used to be a problem and the comparison was unable to finish, or I don't know. And why this is an issue? This is an issue because if your CLI will exit with something that is not 0, the Azure pipeline will believe that this is a failure and it will stop the pipeline. Of course, you can say that I want to ignore basically all those errors and I want my pipeline to continue, but in that case, when it will exit with non-zero code, which will be exit code 2, it will mean that you will basically lose the visibility to the potential errors that may happen because, I don't know, let's say the files were not there or something like that. So that is why I was forced to add this kind of a if statement below. So I'm checking if the exit code of the previous command was either 0 or 1, then I will treat both of them as a successful results, and I will exit with the 0 code, and I will in that way kind of tell Azure DevOps that everything is fine, let's continue our pipeline. But in case the exit code was not 0 and not 1, I want to exit with that exit code because potentially there used to be a problem and I want to stop my pipeline so I can get back and investigate. Okay. The next thing that I want to show you here is the usage of another tool, diff to HTML CLI. This is the npm package created in Node.js, and this one I use here just to do the prettified version of my output, and I will show it to you when I will run the pipeline itself. But what I'm doing here, I'm basically installing that tool to my temp folder, as you can see on a task which starts at line 106, and then task which starts at 116, on line 116, I will run that tool, and what I will say here, I will provide the arguments like on line 121 that my input source is a file, and 122 that I want to export that also as a file. So I want to consume the diff results that were generated by the Git, and I want to create a nice and prettified HTML version of it so I can show it on the Azure DevOps itself. And line 123 side the styles equal side, it basically means that I want to have my comparison side by side in two columns. And then the last argument is I'm basically providing the path to the schema diff file, which was generated as a part of the previous script. And what I have then, I have basically two more tasks. The first one is exporting my HTML, and here I'm using the plugin which called publish HTML report. I'm using that plugin to basically visualize that HTML and attach it to the exact instance of my build run. And the last but not least, publish the build artifacts. So together with all the other artifacts that were produced as a part of this pipeline, I will also publish everything related to this comparison. So what we can do next? Let's go to Azure DevOps and see how it actually works.